Emma Hastings, a 53-year-old housewife, lived what most would call the perfect life. She was married to Jacob for nearly 30 years, and they had a beautiful home in the upscale neighborhood of Willow Creek. Jacob was a successful businessman, and their house, with its well-manicured lawn and classic colonial architecture, was a testament to their hard work and stability. To the outside world, Emma had it all. But beneath the surface, things weren't as perfect as they seemed. Jacob was more married to his job than to Emma. And over the years, he had grown distant, absorbed in his work, and leaving Emma to navigate the long days alone. The love they once shared had faded into a routine of polite conversations and a shared bed that felt colder each night. Emma filled her time with household chores, gardening, and the occasional book club. But the loneliness gnawed at her, growing stronger with each passing day. But this summer, something changed. Something that shocked the whole neighborhood. Jack Turner, the 19-year-old son of their next-door neighbors, returned home from his first year at college. Jack had always been a polite, sweet kid, but this time, Emma noticed something different. He wasn't just the boy next door anymore. He had grown into a handsome, confident young man. The transformation caught Emma off guard, and she couldn't help but notice how good he looked, how his presence seemed to light up the dull days. Their first real interaction happened when Emma was tending her garden. Jack, with his easygoing smile and sun-kissed skin, walked over to the fence to say hello. What started as a casual conversation about college quickly turned into something more. There was a spark, a subtle but undeniable connection. Emma felt it immediately, a flutter in her chest, a warmth she hadn't felt in years. Jack's charm was disarming, and soon Emma found herself looking forward to these little chats, more than she wanted to admit. The innocent talks turned into something else. Each day, Jack would find a reason to be outside when Emma was around, and she began to linger in the garden longer than usual, hoping for another chance encounter. It wasn't long before those encounters became charged with tension, the air between them thick with something unspoken. One afternoon, while Jacob was away on another business trip, Jack came over under the pretense of helping Emma with some yard work. The heat of the day seemed to intensify the energy between them. As they worked side by side, their conversations grew more personal, more intimate. Emma found herself drawn to Jack's youth, his energy, the way he made her feel seen and appreciated. Then it happened. A simple touch. Jack's hand brushing against Emma's as he handed her a garden tool. The contact sent a jolt through Emma, a shock of electricity that left her breathless. She looked up at him, and for a moment, they just stood there, eyes locked, the world around them fading away. Emma knew this was dangerous, knew it was wrong, but she couldn't help herself. The thrill, the excitement, it was intoxicating. That night, lying next to Jacob in bed, Emma couldn't stop thinking about Jack. The memory of his touch, the look in his eyes, it consumed her. She tried to push it away, telling herself it was just a harmless crush, but deep down, she knew it was more than that. She knew she was playing with fire, but she couldn't stop. The spark that had been missing from her life for so long had been reignited, and there was no putting it out. As the summer wore on, the tension between Emma and Jack only grew. What started as innocent flirtation had quickly turned into something far more dangerous. Emma couldn't stay away from him, and Jack seemed equally drawn to her. They began finding excuses to spend time together, always careful to keep their meetings secret. Emma knew it was wrong, but she couldn't resist the pull. The way Jack made her feel, young, alive, desired, was something she hadn't experienced in years. Every time they were together, it was like a shot of adrenaline, a rush that left her craving more. The thrill of sneaking around, the fear of getting caught, only added to the excitement. Their secret meetings became more frequent, more intense. They would steal away to the park just outside the neighborhood, or meet in the quiet, hidden corners of Emma's house while Jacob was at work. Each encounter was filled with a mix of passion and fear, the knowledge that they were crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. Emma's paranoia began to grow. She started to worry that someone would see them, that Jacob would find out. She became obsessed with keeping their affair hidden, going to great lengths to cover her tracks. She changed her routine, made up elaborate lies, and even distanced herself from her friends to avoid suspicion. But no matter how careful she was, the fear of discovery was always there, lurking in the back of her mind. Jack, too, felt the pressure. What had started as a summer fling had turned into something much more complicated. He was in deep, and he knew it. The thrill of being with Emma was exhilarating, but it was also terrifying. He knew that if they were caught, it would ruin everything. His future, Emma's marriage, their lives. Despite the growing risk, they couldn't stop. The need for each other was too strong, the pull too powerful. They became more reckless, taking bigger chances, meeting in riskier places. The thrill of the forbidden drove them forward, even as the danger closed in around them. One steamy afternoon, while the rest of the neighborhood was asleep in the heat of the day, Emma invited Jack over. Jacob was out of town on business, and the house was theirs. As soon as Jack walked through the door, the tension between them snapped. They fell into each other's arms, the passion that had been building for weeks finally spilling over. Afterward, they lay together, tangled in the sheets, the reality of what they had done settling in. Emma's mind raced, the guilt and fear crashing over her in waves. But even as she lay there, she couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction, of fulfillment. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive. But the danger was real, and it was closing in faster than they realized. The affair had taken its toll on Emma. The once composed and elegant housewife was now living in a constant state of anxiety. Every knock on the door, every unexpected phone call sent her heart racing with fear. She was sure someone would find out, that Jacob would somehow see through her lies and discover the truth. But even as the fear grew, so did the obsession. Emma couldn't stop thinking about Jack, couldn't stay away from him. Their affair had become an addiction, a need she couldn't satisfy. The thrill of their secret meetings, the rush of being with someone so much younger, had consumed her entirely. Jacob, oblivious to what was happening right under his nose, continued with his work, unaware of the cracks forming in their marriage. But others in the neighborhood began to notice the change in Emma. She had become more withdrawn, more secretive. The vibrant social woman they knew had become a shadow of her former self. One afternoon, while Emma was out running errands, she ran into a neighbor, Mrs. Peterson. The older woman had always been nosy, always asking too many questions, and today was no different. As they chatted, Mrs. Peterson mentioned seeing Jack around Emma's house quite a bit lately. The comment sent a chill down Emma's spine. She tried to play it off, to act nonchalant, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Was someone watching them? Did people already suspect what was going on? The paranoia that had been simmering beneath the surface began to boil over, and Emma found herself spiraling into a panic. That night, as she lay in bed beside Jacob, Emma couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with thoughts of what would happen if they were caught. The life she had built with Jacob, the respect she had in the community, all of it would be destroyed. But even as the fear consumed her, she couldn't bring herself to end the affair. The need for Jack was too strong, the pull too powerful. She knew they were playing a dangerous game, but she couldn't stop. The thrill, the excitement, it was all too intoxicating. Chapter 4. The Breaking Point. The situation had become unbearable. The affair, once a thrilling escape, was now a ticking time bomb. Emma and Jack were playing with fire, and it was only a matter of time before everything exploded. One evening, as the sun set and the neighborhood settled into its usual calm, Emma received a message from Jack. He wanted to see her. Jacob was away on business again, and the house was empty. Despite the fear gnawing at her, Emma agreed. The thought of being with Jack, of feeling his touch, was too tempting to resist. Jack arrived at the house just as darkness fell. Emma let him in, her heart racing with a mix of anticipation and dread. They didn't waste any time, their need for each other overwhelming. But as they moved through the house, something felt off. The usual thrill was tinged with a sense of foreboding, a feeling that something terrible was about to happen. And then it did. The front door creaked open, and Emma's blood ran cold. Jacob was supposed to be out of town, but there he was, standing in the doorway, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene before him. Jacob's presence hit Emma like a ton of bricks. She stood there, paralyzed, as his eyes darted between her and Jack, piecing together the horrifying truth. The silence in the room was deafening, the tension so thick it was suffocating. Emma could see the betrayal and rage building in Jacob's eyes, a storm of emotions that threatened to erupt at any moment. Jack, equally frozen, looked to Emma for a cue, but she had none to give. Her mind raced, searching for something to say, anything that could possibly diffuse the situation, but the words wouldn't come. This was the moment she had dreaded. The moment where everything she had worked so hard to keep secret came crashing down. Jacob's expression darkened, his hands balling into fists at his sides. The calm, composed man she had known for so long was gone, replaced by someone she barely recognized. He took a step forward, his jaw clenched, and the air between them crackled with tension. Emma instinctively backed away, her heart pounding in her chest. "What is this?" Jacob finally hissed, his voice low and dangerous. There was a tremor in his voice, a mix of disbelief and fury that sent chills down Emma's spine. She had never seen him like this, and the raw anger in his eyes terrified her. Emma stammered, trying to find the right words, but nothing she could say would make this situation any better. She had been caught in the act, and there was no excuse, no explanation that could undo the damage that had been done. In a desperate move, Jack stepped forward, trying to defend Emma, trying to take the blame, but Jacob wouldn't hear it. His fury was directed squarely at Emma, and nothing was going to change that. The betrayal was too deep, the wound too fresh. Jacob lunged at Jack, his anger spilling over into violence. The two men grappled, knocking over furniture as they fought. Emma screamed, trying to pull them apart, but they were too far gone. The struggle intensified, and in the chaos, Jack grabbed a heavy object from the table, a brass candlestick. In a blind panic, he swung it at Jacob, trying to defend himself. The blow connected with a sickening thud. Jacob staggered, his eyes wide with shock, before collapsing to the floor. Blood pooled beneath him, the life draining from his body as the reality of what had just happened set in. Emma's scream pierced the night, a sound of pure, unbridled horror. Jack dropped the candlestick, his hands shaking as he stared down at what he had done. Emma fell to her knees beside Jacob, her hands trembling as she tried to stop the bleeding, but it was no use. Jacob's eyes were already glazing over, his breathing shallow and labored. The weight of the situation crushed down on Emma, the realization that her actions had led to this, that she had destroyed not only her marriage, but her husband's life. She looked up at Jack, her face pale and streaked with tears, her mind racing with the impossibility of what to do next. But there was nothing to be done. Jacob was gone, and the man she had once loved was now lying dead at her feet. Jack, still in shock, backed away slowly, his face ashen. "We have to go," he muttered, his voice hollow. "We have to get out of here." But Emma couldn't move. She was rooted to the spot, her world crumbling around her. The life she had built, the man she had married, everything was gone in an instant, and all that was left was the horrifying truth of what she had done. In the distance, the wail of sirens began to grow louder, piercing the night air. Someone had heard the commotion. Someone had called the police. There was no time left. Emma's mind raced, but she couldn't think, couldn't focus. All she could see was Jacob's lifeless body. All she could hear was the pounding of her own heartbeat. Jack grabbed her arm, trying to pull her to her feet, but Emma couldn't tear her eyes away from Jacob. The man who had been her husband, her partner for nearly 30 years, was gone, and it was all her fault. "Emma, we have to go now." Jack's voice was urgent, but it felt distant, like it was coming from another world. Emma's mind was spinning, the walls closing in around her. But it was too late. The sirens were right outside, and the flashing lights of the police cars illuminated the living room, casting long shadows over the gruesome scene. There was no escape, no way out. As the police burst through the door, guns drawn and shouting commands, Emma knew her life was over. The affair that had once filled her with so much excitement, so much passion, had led her down a path of destruction. The life she had built was gone, and now she was left with nothing but regret and the haunting memory of the man she had lost. The officers swarmed the room, taking in the scene, the blood, the body on the floor, the two people standing in shock. Emma barely registered the cold steel of the handcuffs as they were snapped around her wrists. The officer's voice, a distant echo as he read her rights. As she was led out of the house, past the flashing lights and the gathering crowd of neighbors, Emma felt the full weight of her actions crush down on her. She had destroyed everything, and now she would pay the price. The last thing she saw before the police car door closed was the lifeless body of Jacob Hastings, the man who had once been her husband, lying cold and still in the place they had called home. And in that moment, Emma knew she would never escape the nightmare she had created. The days following that fateful night blurred together for Emma. The cold, sterile environment of the police station, the harsh lights of the interrogation room, the endless questions from detectives. All of it felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. She barely recognized herself in the reflection of the interrogation room mirror. A hollow, broken woman, far removed from the elegant housewife she had once been. The news of Jacob's death spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. The story was all anyone could talk about, a scandal that rocked the quiet neighborhood to its core. The perfect couple, the respectable Hastings family, torn apart by betrayal and murder. The media had a field day, their headlines screaming about the suburban scandal and the affair that ended in bloodshed. Emma's neighbors, once her friends, turned their backs on her. She was shunned, whispered about, and vilified. To them, she was no longer Emma Hastings, the devoted wife and gracious hostess. She was a murderer, a woman who had destroyed her own family for the thrill of an affair with a boy young enough to be her son. Jack was arrested that same night, his future shattered in an instant. The boy who had once been full of promise now faced charges of manslaughter, his life forever tainted by that single moment of violence. His parents, devastated and humiliated, distanced themselves from him, unable to reconcile the image of their beloved son with the cold reality of what he had done. Emma's trial was swift. The evidence was clear. The affair, the struggle, the fatal blow that had ended Jacob's life. There was no denying her guilt, no escaping the consequences of her actions. The courtroom was packed with spectators, all eager to see the downfall of the woman who had once been the envy of the neighborhood. As the judge pronounced her sentence, 20 years to life in prison, Emma felt a strange sense of relief. The weight of her guilt had finally found its place, a burden she would carry for the rest of her life. She was led away in handcuffs, the last remnants of her once perfect life left behind in that courtroom. In prison, Emma had nothing but time to reflect on her choices, on the path that had led her here. The thrill of the affair, the excitement of being desired by someone young and vibrant, had all been fleeting. Now, all she had were the cold, hard walls of her cell and the memories of the life she had destroyed. Jack, too, was haunted by his actions. His youthful arrogance had cost him everything: his freedom, his future, his innocence. He spent his days in a juvenile detention center, awaiting trial, his once bright future reduced to a bleak existence of regret and shame. Jacob's death left a void in Willow Creek that could never be filled. His family mourned the loss of a man they had loved and respected, their grief compounded by the scandal that had ripped their lives apart. The Hastings home, once a symbol of success and stability, stood empty, a haunting reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded within its walls. As the years passed, the story of Emma Hastings and Jack Turner became a cautionary tale, a dark legend whispered about in the shadows of Willow Creek. The neighborhood moved on, new families moved in, and the scandal slowly faded from memory. But for those who had lived through it, the wounds remained, a reminder that even in the most perfect of lives, darkness can lurk just beneath the surface. And so, Emma lived out her days in the quiet monotony of prison life, the woman she had once been nothing more than a distant memory. The love and passion that had once driven her to madness were gone, replaced by a cold emptiness that echoed within her soul. The price of her choices had been steep, and she would pay it for the rest of her life, locked away from the world, forgotten by the people who had once admired her. In the end, the thrill had not been worth the cost. The affair that had promised so much had taken everything from her, leaving nothing but ruin in its wake. And as she lay alone in her cell each night, Emma was left with only one thought. If she could do it all over again, she would have walked away. But there were no second chances, no do-overs. The past could not be undone, and the future held nothing but darkness. Emma Hastings, once the queen of Willow Creek, was now just another lost soul, paying the ultimate price for a moment of forbidden passion. And so, the story of Emma Hastings came to its tragic end, a story of love, betrayal, and the deadly consequences of a secret affair. A story that would be remembered, not for its passion, but for its destruction. Want to see more of this? Then click on the video you're seeing on your screen now